Okay, so we should be live now. I'm going to get Jay before I introduce you. I'm going to get you to go behind the camera, and I want you to pan the camera for our online audience. It's the first test. We thought the presentation was going to be the hard thing.
Can't wait to trip over the tripod.
Yeah, and while you're panning it, I'll just welcome everyone who's on the stream. So thank you for joining us on the stream, and hopefully you can hear me and the audio is working. If it's not, then text or phone me. I'll have my phone. Actually, no, text or phone. Go on Slack. Go on the ProductTank Slack. Someone there, Suhel will catch up. Will catch anything you say. If there's anything wrong with the screen, let him know. I did a bit of a shout out recently. Said if there's anyone who wants to talk at a ProductTank, and Jay was volunteered by a colleague really quickly, and then said, "Yep, I'll do that." So thank you, Jay, for being volunteered and putting your name in the hat to talk about strategy. And we haven't actually talked a lot about what you're going to talk about, so I'm as interested as anybody. So the title, I'm not going to tell you. Jay's going to introduce his own talk. I don't need to do any of that.
And so you haven't seen it.
Especially since I don't know what he's talking about. So yeah, Jay, thank you for joining us, and I'm going to leave it up to you now to wow the crowd.
Cool.
All right.
The pressure. Yeah, so...
And I'm just going to ask you, did you put your mic on? Yes.
Unless someone tells me otherwise. Cool. So what I wanted to talk about today it was actually something that Tokes put up a couple of weeks ago about what is a strategy and what isn't a strategy. And I started thinking about some of the challenges I've had as a PM, product leader, product role is quite often you will be presented a strategy or you will present a strategy and then what you get is, so what's that mean for me or what do I do now? And quite often, depending on the size of your structure and where you go, you might get, it becomes a bit of a tick the box exercise sometimes. Like if the teams doing the work don't understand why they're doing it or what decisions to make and how they do it, it sometimes can become a bit of, we gather once a year, do a bit of a rah-rah speech, everyone has some pizzas and we kind of move on, but then nothing happens and moves forward. So what I kind of wanted to do, and I've used the word translate really, really purposefully, and I might say it a lot, so forgive me if you hear it a lot, but the reason I use the word translate is if your teams or the people you work with don't get the strategy, it doesn't mean it's wrong, or it doesn't mean you have to rewrite it and redo it. It's either you have to ask more questions and get more context from people, or you have to do a bit of jiggery pokery and some ring mastery to get the teams to understand what they want to do. I'm really keen for anything that's kind of more interactive, that's not just me talking for a block of 40 odd minutes. So just shout out any questions as we go. So one of the big things is to understand why is a product strategy so important. And I'll go into it a bit later, but your strategy is your bridge between your vision and your roadmap. So it's how you're going to achieve the big fancy things that people put up on the walls, but also it's not about the day-to-day stuff. It's unlocking and showing the value of what you're doing today and how it is going to help drive your business forward. But what it also does, really importantly, is it sets out what you're not going to do. One of the hardest things about being in a product role is having people come to you with loads of ideas, loads of feature requests. The old adage of the squeaky wheel, getting the oil, you get one or two customers. So without a really good strategy in place, you don't really know what to say yes to, what to say no to, and it becomes a matter of opinion, and people can get upset about opinions. The biggest thing then it really helps you do is helps it align the organization both upwards and downwards and side to side or whatever structure you have. Keeps everyone focused on the right things to do and just really enables the teams to be, it's a phrase I like to use, it's like meaningfully autonomous, because everyone likes to have autonomous teams and everyone wants to be empowered to do their own stuff. But is it the right thing to do? Are we moving in the right direction? Because at the end of the day, everyone wants to do meaningful things. Highlights how your product will achieve business goals. So depending on the size of your company and the way you are, you might have, in a smaller company, your business strategy will be your product strategy, or in some larger companies, you'll have a business strategy, an engineering strategy, a product strategy, a marketing strategy. So we have to make sure that they're all kind of chugging along in the same pitch. And one of the worst experiences I ever had in one of my previous companies was a 2-day strategy-a-thon where every single department just presented their strategy one after another, and no one could Apart from the fonts and the color code, that was the only thing that was different, the same, sorry, the whole way through. The biggest thing that I've seen, and the biggest difference maybe between a business and a product strategy, is that your users will be at the heart of everything you do. So some business goals might be reduce cost to serve, that sort of stuff. But your product strategy should be all about your users, the people that are either going to buy it, sell it, or use the product, and that's the real differentiating factor for me. Biggest thing, it'll be constantly evolving and moving. I really don't like this regular cadence that I've seen where people go once a year or once a quarter we revisit it. Then it's not live, because it's a bit like the COVID-19 situation. Pretty much every strategy that was done or roadmap that was done before that had to be thrown out the window and started again. If you don't get back into the habit of it and you wait till next year, it's a bit like the waterfall versus agile conversation. You can have a really great idea, go into your rabbit hole, build it, come back up, stick your head above the parapet. You're over here. All your users and customers are now over here. One of the things I wanted to really call out as well is that obsess over your users and not what your competitors are doing. Now, competitive research and analysis is really important, but try not to get into building something for the sake of building something. So one of my favorite TED Talks is by Melissa Perry. She talks about the build trap, where you're just constantly churning features out. So it's a bit like you've probably been at presentations where someone's presenting an idea that's not their own, and it doesn't really make it past the first 1 or 2 rounds of questioning because they don't believe in it, they don't own it. It's the same thing of company A might have 5 features and you might have 2. Don't go and build the other 3 features if they're not the right thing for you, because you don't know their reasons why they did it or if your users even want it. And also, when you present it back out, you don't really want to be chasing someone else, because it's quite hard to get people engaged and energized behind. We're just trying to catch up with someone. So it's one of the mistakes I've seen with competitive analysis is using it to go, okay, these are the next few things we're going to build without understanding why it's out there. So I'll talk about it a bit later, but I'm very high on the words yours, ours, us, rather than theirs. So that they are doing this, we should be doing this. If it's not your idea and you don't believe in it, no one else will. So, with it being so important and you know what it is, why do they fail so often? Or why is... Most of the reactions I see is like, okay, so what does that mean for me? Or why do I need to buy into this? Or, okay, well, the exec team have done that. That sounds great. That's why they went to Martinborough for 2 days. Cool, let's go back on with it. That work. One of the biggest things is unrealistic goals. So the tagline I tried to get up there but it wouldn't fit was a fantastic future needs to be embedded in the present. So if it's not reasonable, or so for example, you could say, oh, by 2025 we want to be in Australia, Canada, and the UK, but if your current app isn't even suitable for your market that you're currently in, people are going to switch off pretty quickly. A plan for the sake of it. This is one of the big bugbears of mine, is once you get into that regular cadence of, yeah, we do a product strategy, we do a business strategy, and every year we do it. If you don't mean it and you don't see the value in it, don't do it. Because the next thing that happens, it becomes too rigid and it becomes overwhelming. So things change, market shift, customer shift, competitors come into the market all the time. If you really stick to it and go, here's exactly what we're going to do, here's our plan on the paper, this is our year, we've done it, away you go. What happens next week when your competitors release something new, or you find a new bug in your system? So all of this, and the overwhelming part to me really comes back to a disconnect between what your technology and your app or your product does now versus what you're trying to get it to do. I've done it before where we say we want to launch into another market, or we want to add online sign-ins to our system, and then the engineers just look at me and go, well, that's going to take 3 years with that current product. And you go, well, I've already sourced funding on it, and you're already off to a losing start, which kind of leads to no buy-in. And once you have no buy-in, you're not going to do anything. Because if you don't have the teams pulling in the same direction, you can't do it all on your own. You really need everyone on board with you. So in the true act of work smarter, not harder. Like I said, I was voluntold for this. I've stolen Andrew Coakley's side. So you might have seen him put it up on I even managed to give him credit on the bottom there, so I'll leave it up there as long as I possibly can. On a personal note, I was trying to find a dodgy picture for him because of the picture he stole from my profile for this thing, which is quite funny because it wasn't the one I sent you. Anyway, so one of the most important things to do is know what it is and what it's not, and this actually fits right in with, it's not your vision and it's not your roadmap, it's how you achieve both of them. It's the bridge between it. So what we want to be, that's your vision, that's the stuff you get the investors behind, that's the stuff you get everyone, get all the troops behind, and then you've got what your teams are doing, the actual work that we're doing to unlock the value. How do you make sure that this meets this and vice versa? You get a strategy in place. So I won't take too much credit for that. I'm sure he can talk to you about it himself when he wants to. One of the big things for us here is understand your role. So I just wanted to kind of get a quick pulse check on the audience we've got here. Have we got many PMs, POs involved? People that are in leadership? It always annoys me when the PMs and POs put their hand back down and don't put it up for leadership. Because as hokey as it sounds, we are all in leadership and influential roles. But one of the things to really hone in on here is that know that your role will shift during this stuff. So again, as a product leader, which is a term I'll use rather than PM, PO the whole way through, because I prefer to use that because it's more encompassing. We all know that you'll wear many hats during the course of it. One of the curses of a product role is when everything goes right, the team did a really good job. When everything turns to crap, you're the one that gets pulled in to explain why it did and why it didn't. But embrace that. Like, it's a really important pivotal role. Most of the time, you'll own the keys to the kingdom because you'll know more about what's going on than anyone else. With that, though, you then become the conduit between senior leadership and the teams. So I like to describe it as you're a bit of a filter. You know what to go up, you know what to come down. But if you're going to do that, you need to understand it really, really well. So I kind of like to talk about switching between an engaged stakeholder and an evangelist. So if you're in a position where senior leadership or CPO or someone is presenting the product strategy to you, that's when you're an engaged stakeholder. Be really, really comfortable questioning that. One of the biggest mistakes you can make is assuming that they don't know what they're talking about. There'll be 20 or 30 hours worth of meetings a week that you're not involved in. If you don't understand it, you may just not have got the context. So again, like I said, if you don't fully understand it, you can't embody it for your team. You might fall down at the first round of questioning. We end up in okay, well, that's just something we do for the sake of doing it. But then you become an evangelist. So once you understand it, you get on board with it, you kind of protect it, you embody it, you live it in everything you do. But you have to be comfortable switching between it. One of the biggest things I've seen, I don't know if anyone in here has had to present a strategy to a bunch of people. It can be quite hard to be questioned on it because you've done so much work and you've done so much research, and then you get all these questions at you, and sometimes it's your baby and you feel quite attacked. I speak for myself. I've sometimes been like, screw you guys, you don't know all the work I did, but then that's my fault because I haven't explained it. So you have to be really comfortable being questioned and being questioned in a public space. So one of the things is practice it, record it, do a talk. So again, I'm going to use the word translating. This is where it really comes into play. So your job as a product leader is to ensure your teams feel empowered and, again, meaningfully autonomous. And this all starts with a compelling strategy for them. So if you think of all the different teams you've got in your business, you may have platform, DevOps, web, mobile, etc. They may not see how they fit into the broader strategy. So this is where you kind of come into becoming goal focused. So I like to talk about lagging and broad goals, and then leading and specific goals. So lagging goals are something that they're really easy to measure but hard to influence, because the example I've got here is by 2025 we'll have 25,000 customers in Australia. You tend to have to wait till 2025 to know if you've done it or not. Obviously, there's some hints along the way, but the problem I find with these, they're great to rally people around and get people believing in it, but it's really hard to tie these into the work you're doing on a day-to-day basis because they're so far in the future, you can't see what you're doing. And a lot of people don't feel like they can influence them, so it's hard to tie it into your day-to-day work. Similar, you'll see stuff like reduce cost to serve or increase operator efficiency. Okay, so if I reduce cost to serve by 50 cents a customer, is that good? Technically, I've met that goal. So to get the teams and to get it into your daily, weekly, and I like to say sprintly, but everyone rolls my eyes when I say sprintly cadence, you need to go into what's kind of known as leading indicators. So they're forward focused. So so if we want to improve customer efficiency or customer self-service, but we've got an app that crashes every time someone goes to a page, you can make the assumption, quite rightly, that if you can stop the app crashes, obviously customer experience and satisfaction should go up. So I like to kind of say that strategic goals will be lagging, but product team goals should be framed in this manner. Like really clear, we want to reduce the amount of app crashes by 15%. We want to reduce the runtime of a certain job or a certain script that runs every day, because you can measure them as you go and people can see that we're moving towards it rather than having to wait the 5 years, 6 years to see if you met it at the end. I couldn't resist a dad joke. I had to take so many of them out, but this is what I wanted to do. So it kind of brings me to my strategy. Within a strategy point that I was talking about earlier, so it may be hard for individual teams to see how the work they're doing fits into the overall strategy. That's where you're translating your product leadership skill comes in. So you should be able to create a strategy for your product area, your group, your teams, however you're set up. You should be able to shift it from, okay, that's the forward thinking one. What are we going to try and achieve in the next month, 2 months, quarter, etc. So I call these supplementary strategies. So they will be very team focused, very goal focused, but you should always be able to reel them back up into the company vision or the company strategy. So a lot of theory. I'm just going to kind of talk through the process that I go through when we do it. So above the line is business level, exec level, whatever you want to call it. Below the line is where the product team comes into it. So simple thing, you can see I've got a pet peeve for reduced cost to serve because I just hear that all the time and it feels like a copy paste thing that you just do. This is great. Cool, sounds great. So like I said earlier, is it by 1 cent, 2 cent, 3 cent? How do we achieve it? So the first thing I would do, and this is me being the engaged stakeholder and being comfortable questioning, we go, cool, so we need to know what our actual goal is. So our goal is to reduce cost to serve by $1 per customer per year. Cool, I can understand that. And then more so, you can say, why are we doing that? Okay, well, we've got 400,000 customers. If we save $1, that's $400,000 a year that we can reinvest. So you can see as people, you get into that mindset, people can see why they're doing it and why we're focusing on it. So as a PM, I end up, what I say, this is now my supplementary strategy. So I've got increase operator efficiency. So if we want to reduce cost to serve, increasing operator efficiency makes sense. So I've got a more specific goal that I want to reduce call times by 10%. So this is the goal that I take to the team. So we've got grooming or brainstorming, whatever you want to do, whatever you call it. This is where I take it to the team. And this is where we start to get our roadmap features. So we're going to say, we want to reduce call times by 10%. So we'll auto-assign customer calls. So you find out from talking to operators that we don't have a touch tone screen, so the debt team get the wrong calls and there's a lot of time shifted around. Okay, let's enable online ticket support. So if people can go online, fix their own tickets, great. Or add and improve the address finder. So why I put that in there is don't always put it on the customer. You might find that while your operators are on the phone, there's a certain part of the app or the form they've filled out that doesn't work really well. So there's multiple ways of doing it. The key for this model that I use is you can use it backwards as well. So if someone comes to you with an idea or a feature, you can go, cool, let's run it through the training and see if it meets one of our goals. But what this really allows me to do is I end up, so if you've got multiple teams you're looking after, this could be strategy for team 1. Team 2 is going to focus on adding more self-service capabilities. So that leads us to other goals. So the reason why I wanted to highlight this is while percentage goals are good, they can be quite misleading because you can reduce call times by 10% because no one's calling you anymore. It's not, you can dress it up and move it around how you want to, or increase customer self-service by 20% last month, but we had 42 less customers that come in. You can kind of fudge them as you want to. So I like a combination of a real hard goal. We want to get 500 online signups per month and increase customer self-service by 20%. So what this then allows you to do is, again, you go into your roadmap. So we can create a knowledge base, add self-service. I won't read through them all, but you can kind of see why I use the term translating. So this is the strategy we were given. We asked more questions, we understood it, and then we came up with our supplementary strategies. And the teams or the marketing teams, whoever it is, you can follow the logic of why this piece of work we're working on now is going to help us meet our goal in a year or 2 years' time, which has always been something I've struggled with when someone's gone, we want to launch into a new market. You go, okay, what do I do? How do I get that? So this is the process I use.
Jay, I've got a question.
Yep.
Do you also think about the temporal nature of those goals? Like, so to say reduce call times by 10%, does that mean tomorrow they need to be 10% less, or is, how do we see that progressing over the year or the time frame of the strategy? How do you think about that?
So I think about that when we talk to the teams. So it depends on what your cadence of a business is. You also want to make sure that if this is a yearly goal, that's not a yearly goal, because then you've not actually translated it to the team. These should be the ones that shift and move quite quickly, that you bring to the teams. They go, okay, that doesn't work. I would also look at the costing sizing of the roadmap items and see, is there an MVP in there? Do we have to do everything to make this target? And that helps the timeline. So the timeline's a bit, I was going to say linear, but it can move and shift around depending on what you want to do. Because you might have something like that could take a couple of days, and then you'll see that now we've reduced call time by 2%. We're getting there. One of the really important things to do with this sort of stuff is to don't overcommit yourself into doing something, because if you go down this path and the business goals change, you don't want to be halfway through a huge amount of build and have to shift stuff around. Yeah, depends on what your business cadence is, really. Usually I've been working in quarters mainly and trying to set it up quarter so we can report back, but that's just what my reporting line has been. But it tends to be based on the sizing the teams give me, and then we kind of adapt and adjust. So that's kind of one of the points I was going to talk about later, about making it our strategies. That's not me saying this is the product strategy, go and do it. It's testing it, validating it with them. Cool. So I really want to talk, the next thing I want to talk about is your influence as a product leader. So there's a neuro-linguistic programming exercise that you do to highlight the importance of your words. So while I've been kind of stalling and mumbling, you've been staring at this picture of a blue tree. So what I want you all to do is just close your eyes. Cool. Whatever you do, don't think about a blue tree. Don't think about the blue leaves blowing through the wind. Don't think about the blue leaves on your car. Don't think about raking up all those blue leaves at the end of the day. So, what did you all think about?
The green tree.
So, fine, cool. You know that people on the stream know there's other people here, so I'm expecting people to answer that. So, what this is supposed to prove, if we don't have smartasses in the room, is that your wording and your framing of everything you do is really important. So one of the biggest mistakes that NLP teaches is using terminology like, I know it's going to be hard, but we'll do it. People only hear that it's going to be hard bit. I know it's shit, but we'll get through it. People only hear that we know it's shit bit. So I don't know if you know, but there's a 9-to-1 ratio in your brain. So because of the fight mechanism, we latch onto negative thoughts, because they're perceived threats. So one negative thought creates a pathway. You need 9 positive reinforcements of that to undo the negative pathway. It's really interesting. And doing it, we're in it together. I know it's going to be crap. Actually, just makes people think it's going to be crap. So the reason I bring that up, rather than just being a real nerd, is it comes back to generating buy-in. And one of the biggest things about this is really be aware of your influence. Now, having been in both positions where I've had a CPO or an exec team present the strategy to me and kind of gone, okay, what does that mean, and run through it, and then you've got the team coming to you straight away, you've got to be really quick and sharp when you're doing this, because one of the things is that I find works the best is words like mine that are their strategy. You put it in a box and you kind of allow people to think, okay, that's not my responsibility, that's someone else's. If it doesn't work out, it's not going to be on me. Shift it to our, your, or us. Now, I know it sounds a little bit hokey, but if you can really pay attention in the next week or so about how you use your words and see the differences in people, once you kind of go, this is our strategy, people will tell you whether they agree with it or not, because you're already putting the onus on them that they own it and they're getting through it. It took me a while to believe it and watch it, but it works wonders. So in short, it becomes part of your regular conversations. Now, by this, I don't mean don't do what I've been doing today and use the word strategy 52 times, but you should be able to link everything back to either a goal or a business reason or an outcome we're trying to do it. So as you do it more and more and more, teams become more used to it and more adept at it, and it's not as alien to them. But the whole point here is to try and get your day-to-day life easier and make it more useful for everyone. So link the work you're doing as a team back to the strategy early and often. Kind of the 2 points are pretty much the same, but if you want to show value in something, you have to believe in it. You have to get everyone on board. When you're doing reports up to the board about why you spent X amount of money and stuff, you need to link it back to the strategy that they give you. So this is the biggest learning I've had, is when things change or need to be adapted, really use positive framing. So like I said, you've got the negative pathway and the positive pathway. As soon as you say anything negative, that's what the brain latches onto, and that's it. They'll automatically just assume that it's going to take too long. It's simple things like, this is going to take a long time, but we'll get there. People just think this is going to take a long time. It's really interesting if you get into it that you can really notice the effect your language has on other people's body language, and you can see people closing or people being open. Trust me, if you can be aware of it, it does make a huge difference. But this is the other point, that if things change, be sure to acknowledge the great work that got you there. So if a strategy changes or the market changes, don't just throw out the work that the teams have been doing. And it's not a case of we've changed what we're doing because the work wasn't right, or we've changed what we're doing because etc. So you go, yep, based on what our previous strategy was or our previous focus was, all the work we did was great, but this has changed. Now we have to move forward and give as much context as you can. So communicate early and bring everyone along for the ride. So harnessing your strategy to make your day-to-day easier. So if you fully understand your strategy, you've done all the stuff we talked about, you've created supplementary strategies for your teams, what it allows is it enables better conversations. So what I mean by better conversations is, it's not, how many times have you been in a thing where it feels like it's you against a developer or you against a marketer about what we should do, or people get really attached to their ideas and they feel like you're just telling them no. You know why you're saying no to them. Talk about it, bring it up. If you've got a strategy or a business goal or something, it's much easier to have that conversation. It takes kind of the opinion out of it. And again, provides easy validation because you know what your goals are, you know what you're trying to achieve. It should become quite easy to go through that backwards process of, cool, you want to put this on the roadmap, which goals does it help us do? Cool. One of the things that I struggled to word this really well is having strategy in place actually allows you to change strategies much easier. It's a bit like agile principles and frameworks, and the more you do it, the more you can change and adapt as you go, rather than people think, I'll wait till I get the right one or I'll get it perfect before I change things. The mic dropped off. yeah, so that's kind of the worst thing you can do, because then when you do drop it on people, they've been lost for a while or they're not used to it now. It's a new thing for them. And again, I keep saying this, it bridges the gap between the vision and the roadmap. Your strategy isn't your roadmap, it isn't your backlog. It's how the things in your backlog and your roadmap are going to unlock your business goals. So, just a bit more on this. The reason I like it is it takes opinion out of things. You've got goals that everyone's going for. Everyone understands why we're doing it. One of the biggest things I've noticed over the last couple of years for me is kind of shifting from a no to a not yet. Because a hard no is quite disappointing and can be quite disheartening for people. But if you can go, yep, that's a great idea, either we'll do it later or let's go back to the drawing board and see how we can make our strategy, or we can go, great, we're not working in that area yet, but we'll do it. So people feel listened and they feel engaged and they don't feel kind of cut off, which I know I have sometimes when I've brought a product feature to someone and they just said, no, we're not doing it. You kind of go, well, I'm not putting myself out there again. That's the last thing you want to do. And I've also been in the position, and I bet a few of you have, was when we released something that didn't work and an engineer goes, I knew that wouldn't work. Cool, why didn't you tell me about that? So,
as a just a question on that, how do you, going back to what you were sort of saying about the 9 to 1 thing, if people are holding that mindset based on past experiences and stuff like that, do you have any kind of like tips or anything on trying to break it down and reverse back to a positive place?
put yourself out there.
Just repeat the question and maybe stand
Oh.
closer. These mics might not be working. It might be coming out of his phone.
So to repeat your question, if you've got someone stuck in a negative mindset and they feel like they've not been listened to before and it stops them going into it, how do you break out of that? The biggest thing you can do as a leader is be as vulnerable as you can, put yourself out there and talk about how when you've brought something up that it didn't go quite well, or about how you reacted and moved past it. Try not to make them feel like it's a big daunting thing to bring stuff up, because I mean, what is it? It's about 1 out of 10 product ideas ever make it to get done, and you will pitch millions and millions of ideas over the time that will just not go through and the world doesn't end. But be really encouraging, and one of the things I like to do is say that we'll work on it together to make the pitch better. So that's why I kind of tried to go to the not yet, and then let's try and work on it together. Because if they really believe it's a good idea, it's a bit like what I said earlier about being an engaged stakeholder with the strategy. If you don't fully understand the goals and why you're doing it, ask more questions, because people won't bring ideas and features to you without having thought it through, usually, anyway. Unless they pay you, then they'll usually just wake up at 3 in the morning and say, I think this is what we need to do now, and that becomes a bit of a harder conversation. So this is one that I really, 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 really believe in, is that things change, and your business strategy may not, but your product strategy should, and it should evolve, and it should move all the time. And the more and more you practice it, the more and more you get people on board with it, the easier it is for people to change. And if you go back to always talking about the positive side of it, always acknowledging the work that they've done already and explaining why we have to change it. It's not a case of we're coming in, boss says we're doing this, or I say we're doing this. You'll lose them. You lose them pretty quickly. So yeah, having teams that are set up and they fully understand the strategy really allows you to change it. So don't fall into the trap of trying to make it perfect before you present it to people. Do it early, get it validated, and try and do it as a team. One of the things I saw this, I think I probably saw it on one of my wife's pin cushions, but it's be bold, be brave, but most importantly, be curious. Like, ask questions, don't just accept anything. And why the term product leader is so important is because you are a leader. So usually you will have the ear of someone in senior management that your teams may not have, or someone else may not have. Embrace how important and pivotal that role is, but earn it as well. Like, don't put yourself in front of the team a lot. So if you think it's going to be a difficult conversation, it's a bit like how do you break the pathways thing, is show them by example, be vulnerable, put yourself out there, and who knows what might happen. So I'm actually got through this a bit quicker than I thought it would. So again, fully embracing your strategy. It can daunting at first, especially if it's presented to you and you don't fully understand why we're going in that way. But the more and more you get into it, the more and more you use it, it will get easier. So, what we talked about, embrace your role, be prepared to ask questions to fully understand it. Like I said, you will be the conduit, you will be the go-to person, and you will also be the person that gets blamed when it all falls apart 9 times out of 10. So embrace it, push back, ask questions, answer questions. Just really, really don't see questions as a bad thing. It's a sign of an engaged, captive audience. And also, if they're asking you questions that you think are simple, you probably haven't explained it well or given enough context to see it that way. Don't ever see it as a negative thing. So create supplementary strategies. So translate the strategy into a team-focused one. So remember that a product strategy can be a week, a sprint, a month, a quarter. Do what you need to. You can have multiple ones going at the same time, but the teams need to understand why they're working on something and how it flows up and how it relates to the overall business goals. Become goal focused. So I use the word translate again because it's the topic I picked and I stuck myself with that word. So translate broad goals into specific measurable goals. So you're not replacing them and you're not saying that they're not right, but you're just making them more manageable and more understandable. And that goes both ways, because if you say this is the leading goal I've given the team, you need to be able to float it back upwards to explain to your board or whoever that this goal that the team are working on, the strategy that the team are implementing, will actually help move us forward. And if you can't do that, go back to the drawing board. So be aware of your influence. So use positive, inclusive words like us or our, and try and get rid of the there and the and them kind of mentality. I know you don't notice how much you would use that in your day-to-day life, but trust me, when you become aware of it, it's crazy. And I think we've all done the arm around someone, don't worry, everyone else doesn't know what they're doing, but we'll do it, or we know it's going to be tough, but we'll get through it. But it actually doesn't help people. And it's kind of part of the embrace your role as the leader. At times you will have to have difficult conversations, and don't be afraid to have them. So, and then again, like I said, encourage conversation. So like I try to do, shift from the no to the not yet. Embrace questions, because you might find out stuff that you didn't know. More often than not, the engineers and the devs will know the app probably better than you do. And in my experience, they're a lot smarter people than I am. So listen to them, get their feedback, make them feel engaged, make them feel involved. And if strategy is not right, then it's not right. You change it. So embrace change. Markets change, everything shifts, competitors come out, COVID happens. It's just going to happen, especially as we go more and more digital. So don't get stuck in it. Just because you've got a 2020 or 2021 strategy doesn't mean it can't change in November and December and January, because stuff just happens. And again, I'm just going to put this up here because I worked really hard on it. But one of the things is to show that, so we kind of went through it that way, but also you can use it this way. So if you come up with a new idea, or a team member comes up with a new idea, you should be able to go through the steps and get it up to a business goal. And once you can do that and explain that, you're more likely to get it on the roadmap, or get funding, or maybe get a not yet instead of a no. So that's it for me. Unless there's any questions.
Just going back to that last slide you had, you talked about like defining those initiatives down in the roadmap level. What methods have you used to define kind of that next layer up of those goals? Because presumably, like, reduce call times by 10% is one of the things, but there's probably a laundry list of 50 of those things that you've got, and then even increase operator efficiency is a decision that you've made for reducing your cost to serve. So, yeah, what methods?
Yeah, so usually that is, so I've only done it in my current situation where we've got PMs that look after a certain area of the app. So we've got operator efficiency. You take what your area of influence is. So if you're not in charge of the web app or the mobile app, you can't really come up with strategies for that. So what I tend to do is get my team leads, my POs, my analysts together, and we say, these are the goals we've got. Do a kickoff or a brainstorm session. get all the ideas from people. But at the end of the day, the accountability falls on you, so you have to make those calls. And to kind of Toke's question earlier, I'll tend to try and pick the easiest, quickest wins, knowing that certain things can change and markets can shift really quickly. Again, I had to kind of make these quite broad for this talk, so you'd know a bit more in your day-to-day what's going to work, what's going to go. But if you go back to, if you can think back to the thing, this slide I did earlier about why it fails, it's trying to make realistic goals that are embedded in what the future is now, or the present is, rather than focusing too far forward. Yeah, I don't know. It's just more kind of as you get into the flow of it, and you know the teams, and you might even have stuff that's already on your backlog and groomed and ready to go. So that quick wins, you can move stuff through. But don't do this on your own. Is the biggest thing I can ever say to you, because you will end up going nuts in a room for a couple of weeks, and then people will tell you that it won't work.
Question about when you came up with the specific goals in relation to the broad goals. So when you talk about things like reducing call times by 10%, how do you decide what percentage to assign to that? Like why 10, not 5 or 20%? And just to make it
well, that was
achievable.
So this was a goal that I had in my previous company based on talks I had with so I interviewed the operators. And quite often I found that we had increased our call times because of features we had added.
Right.
So we'd actually made the app harder for our own operators to use. Again, it was just a number I plucked out, because you've got, what you'll find is you'll find best case scenario of a phone call, and then you'll have worst case scenario, and then you'll have your medium, your mean. So it's how can you get it? So that's like, it's realistic. So say if a phone call is on average 3 minutes, 50 seconds, it may not be realistic to get it down to 3 minutes. So there's no point setting a goal of 25 or 50%.
Right.
So it's kind of bedded in this realistic, make sure it's not overwhelming.
Right. So it takes a bit of qualitative analysis as well then.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I wouldn't come up with these unless you've done some sort of user research or operator research or contacted your design team. Because again, what you don't want to do is you don't want to be the one that puts the unrealistic goals and kills the productivity of the team by doing it. I was worried about putting numbers up here that have those kind of questions, because I can't talk about the real life thing that's behind why we picked those.
Right.
There will be a point, it's a bit like market saturation as well. There's a point where you can't grow any more customers than you have to. So you have to be realistic with it. Like if you've already got 35% of the market and you can't get 50% because very few people do that, you have to find other ways of making your money back. So one of them could be reducing your cost to serve. And to Toke's earlier question is, you might have a reduced call times by 40% as your overall goal, but the next quarter we're going to go for 10% and we're going to kind of drip feed our way through, so we can celebrate the wins as early and often as we can.
Do you want to go, Matt?
Slightly related. Let's say you've got a goal of 10%, but you deliver 5% or 20%, like two hypothetical scenarios.
Yep.
Like, how do you go from there?
Well,
Because one's obviously bad, one's good,
but the other thing, it's like I kind of said about the percentage goals, is did you get 20% in the last 2 months because people stopped calling you or you hired new people? So you have to be able to like trace it back into reality. So there's that kind of, another thing that I like to talk about is like this product umbrella. So you've got a PM that should be looking 6 months in the past and 6 months in the future. So you're looking at what to do, but you're also measuring what you've done. Has it made any real success? So the worst thing about these is, the worst thing you can do with these is you hit the 10% target, market is done, and then next month it goes back up to 5 or 20 or whatever it was again. Going over it is great, but I wouldn't get too cocky with it, because again, you have to understand why you did it and what you did. But even if you don't get it, that's not a bad thing, because you've shifted the needle in the right direction, and that's why I say use the positive framing, because even increasing it to 5%, reducing it by 5% is great. You might have added 20,000 more customers on the place, so there'll be different reasons behind it. So it's actually just be prepared to stand by them and be prepared to not hit them, and also don't hold yourself over the coals for it. If you set, one of the things I don't really agree with is setting stretch goals for product teams. I understand setting stretch goals for the business. I don't really like setting stretch goals for development teams, because if you constantly don't meet a stretch goal, you kind of ruin some of the good vibes of the place and of the team. So you want to set reasonable goals with them.
And it's also like it's a realization of a hypothesis that you set up at the beginning, that 10% of that, 20% of that, 500 of those are going to wrap up to $1 saving or some higher level goal, right? So I don't know whether you might shoot for the star one and then miss the other, but in aggregate, hopefully it will have the impact.
Yeah. So you've got your overall target up here. One of them might make you meet the target. You can say it's successful, but at least you can talk through why you did the feature you did, why you went through the process you did. Yeah.
It sounds like very much like OKRs, key results.
Yeah.
Would that be part of it, or is it separate?
Yeah. It is kind of based in it. The problem I've found with OKRs is they don't shift and move as quickly as some of these product goals could do. So you might have an overall, like for me, this would be your overall OKR for the product of the area, is you're reducing it by $1, and then these are your like leading goals that you're going to try and hit to help you roll up to it. It's based on the same principle, the same thing. It's just about having those really clear objectives for everyone to get to. And the good thing is, like, you know you've hit it or you haven't hit it, and then you can understand the why, and it's okay to talk about it. Because at least to your point, if you only reduce it by 5%, you've got some data to say that this is what we did and this is the result we got out of it. But if you just had improve operator efficiency, how can you say that you've done it or you haven't done it? So that's kind of, for me anyway, I prefer the work in this area of the really broad stuff, so I can stand up and talk about it at the end of a delivery cycle or the end of a release.
Just like these are kind of like, if it goes well, you just put time about 50% or something. If you don't hit that, it's 3 months down the track, and the initiatives that you put out on ship haven't like moved that, what do you tend to do then? Is that a point where you kind of go, well, we're making progress and all these things, so we know these things will hit that? Or do you go, we haven't made progress towards this, so we need to change the goals? How do you handle?
You need to really revisit this. So it's the slide got really noisy when I did it, but you would have a time frame on that. So you'd say, we want to reduce call times by 10% this quarter, and at the end of the quarter, you look at it, and then you just make really educated decisions about what you do next. Are we moving the needle? Always go back to your operators though, because if you've interviewed operators and they're the ones that give you the inspiration to do this, if you've released stuff, go back and talk to them, because just the data on its own might be completely misleading, because you may have, one of the biggest things with call times is actually new staff members. So your product might have actually hit the target technically, but the facts won't back it up because we had 20 new call members there. So it's all about kind of understanding why, and you should understand why if you hit it, and if you don't hit it, like, don't just take it for granted that we smashed the goal, we did everything right, because there could be other things that led to it as well. Which is,
sorry. I guess the only follow up to that would be like, how do you lead the team through that as well? Because like, obviously no one likes not hitting goals and targets. So how do you lead?
yeah, well, I think the biggest thing for me is if you're communicating with them all the time, they're doing it with you. Most of the time, or a lot of the time, depending on what your stats are, you'll actually have to get the team to help you get them, so they'll kind of understand it. It's really good to show success and celebrate early as you go through it. So don't go at the end of the month, we only hit 6%. You can go, actually, now we're at 2, we're at 3. You know, you can trade it through. But when you set the goals at the start, and when you're presenting or talking about them, this is the point where you are leading and you influence them. You shouldn't be setting it up as that we have to hit them at that time unless you absolutely have to. So it shouldn't be a surprise at the end of it. If we don't hit them, this is what we're going to talk about, or if we did hit them, this is what we're going to talk about. Just try your best not to go off into your silo and present everything and do everything on your own and then come back and present it, because people won't really understand what you're doing or why you're doing it.
Jay, you said early on that reduced cost to serve was a bugbear of yours.
Yeah.
Why?
Only because every single CEO I've ever had, that's the first thing they've said to me. Like I said, it just feels like a bit of a copy and paste thing. Really good, sounds great. Everyone wants to do it. That's the only thing, that's why I put it up here, because I've heard it with every single company I've ever worked with. It's like the first thing that's thrown
Look,
out there.
it's not really a strategy, it's just BAU business, isn't it, really?
Yeah,
It's a
and that's,
strategy to invest in it.
Yeah.
Right, like you could go balls to the walls for growth or just total growth. But yeah, this is cookie cutter to me.
yeah, that's why I purposely put it up there as well. Because if I put I did this with my own product team, and I put some really intense goals up there, and I got grilled for like an hour and a half about why I picked that sort of stuff. And then not knowing the audience I was having today, whether it was people in product or not in product, I thought I'd pick one, and I just that one, and what's the other one? Increased customer satisfaction. That's like, I feel like they're the first two bullet points of any new strategy I've ever been given, and you kind of go, oh yeah, cool. Anyway,
Have you ever worked in a product company that didn't have a product strategy?
yes, yep, and that sucked. One of my biggest problems was we lost $1 million on a feature that we built, and the whole way through it, we didn't know if it was the right thing or the wrong thing. And then I got pulled up in front of the board to explain why we did it. But you told me to do it, and that's kind of when I started taking a bit more onus myself, to not just say, "Okay, they've told us to do it, we'll do it." I've also worked in a couple of places where they've mistakenly thought a product strategy was a business strategy, or vice versa. So I've done the product strategy for my product, and then they've adapted that as the business strategy. You're like, hang on, there's a whole other side of this company that we're going to play into it and work into it. So, but if you're the brave one and you're the first one to do it, quite often people will follow you, which is good. Which is why I say embrace the role and the privileged role that it actually is. Cool. Yeah, if there's no one else.
Okay. Thanks very much, Jay. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Great. And if we could all just wave goodbye, and we'll say goodbye to the stream. Bye.